Oh, see, it takes me right away from being able to go live. First, we have to make sure that, come on, that we have permission. All right.
Oh, right, to be able to record that new thing.
Yeah, it's a good thing. It's a very
I don't
good
think it's a
thing.
bad thing. I don't think so. I think it's, yeah, it's fine. It is what it is.
There you go.
They're not giving me a vote anyway, so here we go.
All right, we're about to hit live.
And we are live.
Yay, okay. Right, hello, everybody on Intuition of the Soul. We're all so excited to be here with Ginette, and she's just got a fascinating story. She's going to share so much, and I'm just like sitting in the edge of my chair to get this started.
Love it.
Welcome, Ginette.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really, really thrilled to be here to, share my story, but to be a part of this community that you guys have created of sharing stories and sharing consciousness and sharing those good vibes. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. We really know that we're in an interesting time, and we're hoping Intuition of the Soul can help be a platform, and it's certainly brought us amazing people like yourself. And so when I first reached out, because I went to Avalon Spirit, your site, and went, first of all, I had to look up Avalon, because as much as I've heard it in my life, I'm like, where is Avalon? King Arthur, the whole, and so maybe you can start with how you started, and even Avalon, and of course, Aurora, Avalon to Aurora. Aurora is where I have land, and I call my land Ananda. So I'm very...
Oh, yes, right.
Yeah, so...
Oh, that's so exciting.
And I know Aurora is dawn. It's the dawn. So, and I think in a big dawn here. So anyway, we're here to... Can you tell us about yourself and, kind of help share your story?
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, I live in BC, Canada. I'm a mom. I've got 2 young kids and a husband. So I have a very busy 3D normal life. But I'm also very tapped into spirit. And retrospectively, I could say, I know from the age of 5, even I remember being attuned to spirit, although I didn't come from a family of mediums. I didn't have that auntie or uncle or grandfather or someone that knew what was happening to me, and, to no fault of my parents, but we just didn't come from that lineage. So nobody really knew what to do with me and why I was feeling certain things. And so it was kind of, as much as they wanted to help, it was kind of a lonely road in not understanding what was happening. But I remember about the age of 5, I could feel spirits in my room at nighttime. It's like if I closed my eyes, I could see who they were, although at the time I just thought I was imagining. But there was usually anywhere from like 8 to 12 different beings in my room, which I later learned was my council, right? We all have a council of beings, and they were just with me every night. But because I didn't understand it, it was terrifying to me then, right? So I would have them pretty regularly. At about the age of 15, I saw my grandmother after she passed, and that was really vivid to me. And so that was one big experience, but it was about the age of 17 for me when I really started to intuit stuff from spirit and hear things and things that weren't mine, which really sent me into a lot of anxiety, to be honest. And I know many of you guys on this call, being mediums, being intuitives, when you're getting information from other sources and you don't know that, it's so anxiety producing, right? So I had to...
Medication, talking to people.
Exactly.
You don't even know what to call it.
Exactly. So I had to move through that, which I think we all do, to learn how to really kind of control my mind, which I realize now is one of the greatest gifts. Was once I recognized how to control my own thoughts, then I could open to thoughts that weren't mine, right? So I see again, retrospectively, why that happened. So then I just kept trying to keep a lid on it, not understanding what was happening. But it was around my early 20s. I remember I was at home alone. I was folding laundry, and I heard this voice from down the hallway say, "Ginette, look down the hall." And I was like, no. And you can imagine all kinds of thoughts and words came out of my mouth in terror. And he said, "Ginette, look down the hall." So I remember I slowly turned my head. I was like, oh no. And I saw the figure of this man in military fatigues. He had a t-shirt, but combat pants on and his boots and dark short hair. And my cat was standing right in front of him. My physical cat was standing in front of him, looking at him, swishing her tail back and forth. And I bring up this point because this was significant for me in recognizing that I wasn't crazy. I wasn't nuts in what I was experiencing. My sweet cat's validation of seeing this being, this man, validated for me what was happening. And it was at that point that I decided to dive in and to learn instead of running from it. And that man ended up being, he's one of my lifetime guides, Andre. He's just this beautiful soul. And so I spent a lot of time learning the craft and talking to people and sitting in mediumship circles and, you know, absorbing everything I could until about the age of 28 is when I started doing readings. I was comfortable enough to do readings. And so it's been over a decade now that I've been doing readings for people. And so I say all of that because it adds value to why my NDE was also so significant for me. Because
just for people, NDE is near death experience.
yeah.
I had to look it up because somebody said it. I'm like, near death experience.
Yeah. So yes, my near death experience. It really, whatever I thought I knew leading up to it, which I felt very comfortable. I mean, I'd done thousands of hours of readings, like over a decade of readings. And the NDE, though, blew that all open. I had talked to lots of spirits of different ways people have passed, communicated about passings, about transition, what it looks like on the other side, astral travels, you name it, great meditations, all of that. But when I had my near-death experience, that was completely different. And I say that because if there was any shred of a doubt of what I was doing, say maybe I was 95% confident, 5% little like, really? Like, are we sure? You know, there's fairies for sure, you know, all that kind of stuff.
Right. That voice in the back that once in a while goes, yeah,
all not. Exactly. So after the near-death experience, though, it was like, there's no room for doubt anymore. And I say that because it's like, for example, and I may have used this example when I talked to you guys before, but it's like if I told you everything about Egypt, right? And I showed you all my pictures, I showed you my videos from Egypt, I cooked you the food the best that I could, we listened to the music, I created an atmosphere of Egypt, you could learn a lot about it, right? You could learn a ton about it. But until you're actually there with your feet on the soil, in the temples, walking through the streets, talking to people, it's a different experience. It is a visceral experience, right? And that's how I kind of compare being a medium prior to and then a medium after. Because when you come back from that trip to Egypt, your explanations are more detailed. They're more all-encompassing. And so that's really what I feel I brought back from it. And it was because the experience was so vivid for me, yet also so simple and easy, that I just really made a pact that with my guides that I would come back, and I'll explain that story in a minute, but I made a pact that I would come back and I would share. I would no longer kind of just, rely on word of mouth. I would create a platform. I would create what became Avalon Spirit, our website and our company. I would create that to launch from so that I wasn't holding back. I wasn't sitting in doubt because, as you guys are doing here too, I think the sharing of stories is what helps us grow and evolve. Like when elders gather and they share stories in different cultures, when we share stories of experiences, we can gain a lot of wisdom from people. And so it was really about creating the podcast, creating that platform to share what I knew, so that if it helps somebody, that's great. And if it didn't, well, that's okay. There's other paths.
I think that that's such an important piece because we talked about that, the fact you were a medium and you already were walking down those hallways, and already it wasn't like, a lot of people when they have a near-death experience, everything's new. Not everything was new for you. So you got to experience this near-death experience at such a deeper level. So, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but we're absolutely fascinated by that. So,
yeah.
Exactly.
So I'll take you into the experience a little bit. Now, just prior to my experience, and this is the reason for Avalon and my book, which is called Avalon to Aurora, why these words were significant was A week before my NDE, for my near-death experience, I was camping with my family. I was very ill. I was not well, but I was going to make this camping trip happen for my kids, right? So I'm sleeping in the tent, and this big, huge gust of wind came in our tent. It wasn't windy where it was, but it woke me up in the middle of the night, and Spirit said, you need to remember these words. What was to be Avalon is now Aurora. And I was like, okay, got it. And they're like,
wow.
Yeah. And they're like, you need to remember this. I'm like, yeah, I will. Right. And I'm wanting to get back to bed. Right. And they're like, several times they said, you need to remember these words. And then I was like, I got it. What was to be Avalon is now Aurora. So the next day we're on our way home, and I start kind of tuning into these things. And Aurora, or Avalon, was their way of explaining heaven, the afterlife, which I came to understand all these pieces really solidly after. Right. But I was like, okay, Avalon's heaven, got that. Yep. And Aurora was their symbol of change, something on earth that would change, a game plan that was going to happen was going to change. So they said, what was to be Avalon, the afterlife, is now changing. And so I was like, okay, I'm not quite sure what it means. But when I had my NDE, they said there was a game change plan that was then put in place to give me choice at that point. So then fast forward 5 days later, I have my surgery. It was a routine surgery, but I had been weakened to the point that my guides explained that if I did choose to stay on the other side in heaven, it was a simple, like a flick of a switch, and I would have a massive heart attack, which they wouldn't be able to revive me from. It was that simple, because I had been worn down enough to that point that it just would be. So going into the surgery, I remember this feeling of excitement. And I've had surgery before, and I can tell you, I am not usually excited before surgery. Not many people are. It's not like, woohoo, but I literally was excited. There was some weird excitement. And I remember just having the giggles. When the doctor lovingly called the anesthesiologist the gas man, and she said, when the gas man comes in, we'll knock you out. And I said, all right, let's go. And I was even watching myself like, what are you doing? So he puts the mask on, and then I'm gone. And I land. And again, a lot of this, I'll try and explain it as best I can, but I land on the greenest grass you can ever imagine. It's like green grass, but when we add all those filters that, to our pictures that bring out the color even more, it was like that. And as I was walking bare feet on this grass, I could simply just look at it and zero in on the finite details of every blade of grass while I was walking. And then when I looked over to my right, I could see the most beautiful summer blue sky ever. And my grandmother, who had passed, was with me. And the reason why I think really that this grass was so significant was it really made me feel so much that I was there. I could feel the texture. I could feel everything. It wasn't like an astral travel where you can perceive a lot, which I had done before, but I could feel this. And so I reached these picnic tables where all these people that I knew from this lifetime, but also past lifetimes that I just knew. And we had these hugs like family reunion, but almost like the hugs you get from young kids. When young kids see you and throw themselves in your arms and just wrap you up, it was like that. And my whole experience of being under was about 20 minutes. But to me, my whole experience on the other side was about 24 hours. And so I spent hours at this barbecue with my grandfather, my grandmother, other people, other souls, talking and reminiscing. And I was sitting there on this picnic table saying, what have you been up to? And another spirit was telling their whole story, and I knew them. And so after I spent so long there, my grandmother said it was time for us to go to this other place. And we started walking away, and we ended up in this white room with a big white boardroom table in the middle. And I call it the room of the blueprints, because it's where our literal life blueprints are. And in my time prior to this experience, I would always call these blueprints a tapestry. I would always talk about how we have a tapestry and the weaving of the fates in our tapestry. I would explain it that way, but they showed it to me like blueprints. And so I looked at the windows and I could remember seeing like galaxies outside the windows, but everything was white inside. And it was at the edge of where creation is. It's where things are, it's where like the universe is expanding. It was at the creation point, which somehow doesn't entirely make sense to human terms, but it was that. So they roll out this giant blueprint, which literally looked like blueprints that we see that architects have, like blue background and white drawings. But down the center was this kind of thicker, iridescent, pulsating line, which was my lifeline. And so we reviewed everything up until that point. And I don't know, because in my view, there was a guide beside me here who was the main teacher and telling me all about it. I couldn't see how far it goes compared to, I know that I have this much left. This is what I saw left, right? So I don't know if what I had done before was only this much or if what I've done before is this much. I don't know that.
Oh, so what you say is you don't have the perspective of what this means. Okay.
Yeah, but there's a time. So I'd hit a juncture point, a choice point, right, in my life plan. And so we reviewed all the stuff that I had done. And this is when they said, like, now that you're at this point, do you want to stay or do you want to go back? And I remember being like, oh, well, I definitely want to go back. But I wasn't saying that in a sense of fear. It wasn't that I was afraid or scared they would keep me. Like, I knew that I had choice in this moment. And I said, no, I definitely want to go back. And I remember thinking of my life here. And I was like, no, I want to do more. And so they said, okay. So we looked at that second part of my life plan, right? The one I'm currently in. And they said, now that you're coming back, because of what you learned, you can rearrange some things. So it was like taking out fuses, almost like from a fuse box of these different juncture points we create. And I'll explain why this makes so much sense. But I could take some out and put in some different ones. And it was like I was creating. And so one of the ones that I really remember, they said, you will remember the first one, but we won't give you memory of what these other ones are. But you can choose them now, but you won't remember them. The first one, though, I was able to remember. And it was chronic illness. I didn't need the lesson of chronic illness anymore. And I remember going to take it out thinking like, are you sure? Right? Like, I really can. And they're like, yes. And so I remember pulling it out and I was like, for real? And they're like, yes. And so I put it down and I put in a different one. Like I put in like a different fuse is what was really interesting. And so I did that, and I did that to several others. I remember doing this to several others, but they said, you won't remember those ones. Mm-hmm. But then they said, now that you've done this, are you sure you want to go back? So again, they asked if I wanted to come back. And I said, yes, I do. And so that's when we had this agreement that with me coming back, I would step up. I would step out. I would create these platforms. I would use my voice. I would speak about what I know because I was being given this experience to share it, to inspire, and to help explain how much power we actually have as human beings. And so when they did that, I looked at these different fuses, put it all together, and they said, now that you're going to go back, several things will happen in rapid succession to get you on your path. I said, okay, got it. Thinking it would all just be easy things, right? I'm thinking, hey, here I am in heaven on the other side. It's just going to be easy stuff. I changed out these fuses. And, but I really learned part of it being coming back into then a pandemic, right? Because this was August 30th, 2019, right? That it happened. So coming back then into the beginning of a pandemic and what that all brings was part of this great awakening. But I had such a desire of as a soul to be here for this. And one of the most amazing things that I learned in that perspective was that I was given the opportunity to choose different juncture points of what I thought would be best for my lesson. One of them being, I don't need to experience chronic illness anymore because I'd had a lot of chronic illness of different sorts growing up. And I didn't need that lesson in that form. And so I could change it. And so what I learned from my guides, even in discussing a lot of this after, was how much we create the blueprints of our lives before we come into this lifetime.
I'm absolutely blown away because Amy probably knows where I'm going. When I read charts, I talk about we create a circuit with fuses and different gauged wires, and you pick these energies, and I talk to them. That's what I do. I tell them the story of their energies in their conversations. Mm-hmm. And if that isn't reassuring to me and of how I tell that story, I told you something was, I'm absolutely blown away. So Aurora for me is exactly what I'm already doing, because that's how I tell the story. You make a circuit. The bottom is this, yours is on top of this, and this is what's going on. So, and you're saying exactly that. You can change your fuses. You can decide which fuses fire. You can.
Yep. And you can. And that's the beauty of this concept of destiny that we create. And I'll talk about free will and how that plays into it too. But first of all, just understanding our destiny is we create that. We create that blueprint. And we're not just told what the blueprint is going to be for us. We gather, like I did, with our counsel, with our guides. And we talk about what our lessons are, what we want to do. What I literally did is what we do before we come in. And so it was so valuable because as I went through the experiences of the pandemic being one of them, of, you know, having other things fall apart so that certain things could be rebuilt, but fast, because they said it would happen in rapid succession, and it did, I could really hold on to that perspective of like, no, my higher self, we chose this. We created some fuses. So there's destiny points in here happening for a reason, but where my free will as a human being, because that's equally as important, my free will is what I choose to do with the things that happen, both the ones that I've chosen or the ones someone else has chosen that I happen to be connected into, or, you know, happened on the wrong day or wrong time, whatever you want to say. I always get to choose what I'm going to do about it. And that's where free will always comes in, because I could have set certain juncture points of a lesson, but the human version of me could free will say, no, I'm not learning that lesson yet, and avoid it, right? As we've all seen, it's like, nope, hard no. That's a free will choice. So that lesson will come around again and again and again. And so being able to see that on the other side was so beautiful for me, because it was like, I was like, yeah, Spirit has talked a lot about this. And I would explain it, like I said, like a tapestry, but this blueprint, and to see it was, again, this, nobody can tell me I didn't see that, right? Nobody can tell me that's not how it works. And there may be different descriptions of it, but that idea worked best for my consciousness to understand it. And it really made me feel so much more grounded in why we are all here, why we are going through these things, why we choose to take on certain journeys, and how we can really choose to, when we hit a juncture point of sorts, we can really choose to dig into what that is telling us and really grow and evolve from it and move on from it if we really want, right? Which puts so much more power back in our sovereign human selves as much as it does our spiritual selves. Because I think a lot of times people kind of lose themselves to their spiritual journey and forget to honor the very human person that is animated here, right? We need to kind of balance the two of them. And so that was one of my greatest takeaways from the whole experience, was the fact that choice is our greatest gift. And people will say, well, you know, choice is taken away from me because of this and this and this. And that's true. But then you get to step back and say, okay, because of this external influence, now what do I choose? What can I choose to do about what has happened externally, right? Because we can't control everything outside of us. And when I really hung on to that idea that choice is our greatest gift, it really changed my whole perspective of how I live my life and how I interact with people, and how I've been able to let go of a lot of things that would normally really bug me, right? Or I would really beat myself up about something, right? Like, instead of thinking, say, we've all been there, those that are parents, right? You've got too much on your plate, too much going on, and you get snappy with your children. And you think, gosh, I'm a horrible mom, right? Like, what a bad mom. And instead it's like, no, wait, I'm not a bad mom. But what I can do in this moment is catch myself for a minute. And what I can do is stop and say, guys, I'm really sorry, I'm acting snappy. I don't mean it. Let me actually tell you what's going on. I'm trying to do this, this, and this, and this. And I'm really sorry. Can you give me 5 minutes? Right? And so what we do then in that moment when we consciously choose is we change the whole frequency of our experiences. Same experience of chaos and crazy and kids, but you can choose what you want to do with it. And so that, again, that was why so much of what I wrote about in my book was how choice is our greatest gift. And that was something Spirit really wanted me to bring back, because we then get to really embody ourselves as co-creators in our lifetime. And we're not just here to suffer, but we're here to experience and learn and grow. And if I could learn and grow to a point of having a juncture point and go there and then change some things, we can do that. We don't have to have a near-death experience to do that. We can connect in with our higher self. We can say, I don't want this lesson anymore. Help me bring it to a close. And that lesson may come up one final time, but then you may in that moment step back and say, okay, here it is again. This is going to be the last time. What can I do different? What is in my control? Right. And so we can make those changes and adjustments, because when we're done a lesson, that thing can just get tossed out of there, and then we have more space for flow. And that's what we all really want.
You know, we've been talking a lot about that in this consciousness of letting go in this end of 2021, especially. Yes, when we get rid of it, there's just more space. There's
Exactly
space,
Definitely.
you know,
Yeah.
and that, you know, that's amazing. I love the story. I love the idea. Anytime we can study our energies, we don't have to. Well, that's what letting go of this Piscean age is about. We don't have to suffer.
No.
You know, we've had all of these people come, whether Jesus or Buddha, and say, you guys don't have to suffer. We're just a little thick about letting it go. That's all, you know.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what you learned. Hey, this one can go now.
Yeah. Yeah. And if we're willing to, you know, and as you guys would know, it's connecting with your vulnerabilities, right? It's being willing to be vulnerable, not even just with other people, but really with yourself. Like, am I being fair in my actions to this person or to myself in this situation? Is this really accurate? And sometimes we don't want to see that of ourselves, right? Because as much as we are, you know, we want to put out the best energy, we also don't want to see the worst of our energy. But when we can start to see that in those moments, and if I bring that back to, again, say like with your children, and I know I've just recently had this exact conversation with my kids, instead of viewing myself as not as good of a mom and taking that heavy energy where like other moms would be more playful right now and whatever, and I'm like, I'm frazzled because I'm overstimulated with energy. Instead of judging it, I could say, okay, I don't like this behavior about myself right now. It's not my best. I don't like it. But instead of running from it, how can I learn and grow, be vulnerable and change? And I find every time we do those little things, though, every time we're willing to be vulnerable with ourselves and others for a moment, and we step out of it, we become so much stronger and so much more self-assured. It's the littlest things sometimes that help us like build ourselves up from within when we're willing to see how we're acting and consciously choose.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
It is.
It
So-
is, 'cause it's so much about accepting our humanness. We took a human form to learn from it.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly that. And you know what, actually, that brings up a really good point, is I remember the vast difference between my perspective in spirit and my perspective as a human. And even though I'm a medium, even though all my days are spent in communicating with spirit, connecting people, like I walk in these realms all the time, the perspective from spirit and the perspective from the human is very different. Spirit is all understanding, all loving. I mean, I knew all the stuff I would be coming back to. And I was like, my heart was like, yes, I am ready. Put me back down there. I'm good to go. I got this. I'm so happy. Yeah, let's do it. Right. And I remember that, like, I can feel that energy run through me. But then I also can see the human perspective of like, okay, I remember that. But on the ground here, like, this is hard. This is getting tedious. This is challenging me this way. Like, it's very different. And so we have to remember to, like you're saying, like, value the human experience, not bypass the human experience. Like, be in your body, be visceral, be here, be with your emotions. Let your emotions teach you what you can learn and grow from. That's a very human thing, because there's a lot of spirits that say, one of the things I miss about Earth is the vast array of emotions. Because on the other side, it's predominantly joy and bliss and happiness and light and compassion. And that's beautiful. But there's so much that can be learned in the human form. And so one of the greatest conversations I continually have with my guides and for other people and sharing it is how much the duality on our planet, the density of our planet allows for accelerated learning. So we think sometimes we need to spend all our time in the higher realms to learn and grow, but it's almost like taking pieces from that and then bringing them back into our work here, because we come to Earth to learn like this much in a lifetime and grow and gain wisdom, versus say we went to a higher dimensional plane for a lifetime, we would learn this much because there's more peace and harmony there, less strife. And the other way we can look at that too is Earth is a 3D dimension, right? We are 3D physical forms, higher consciousness, but 3D forms. In spirit, we are sitting in at minimum 4 or 5D, right? So we are descending, coming down in frequency to embody a 3D body, no matter our consciousness. So we're lowering the frequency of what we normally would sit at or go higher. And so when we do that, we're taking on more, but we're going to grow more. We're going to gain more insight. And so there's a value to that. And it's a beautiful gift. Human life is a beautiful gift in the triumphs and the sorrows. It's just hard to see, but then that's where retrospect really brings that into, a beautiful way to see those gifts. In retrospect, I can see so many gifts in my life, but when we're stuck in the mud of one of them, we're kind of like, what the heck's going on here? What am I doing? But then,
let me remember that this is, I did this, I wanted this, right?
Yeah.
And, well, that's true, because sometimes I see people who live a very simple life, and they're very simple people. And I think this choice of theirs was to be so ever present. They're beautiful souls, but they're not doing what we're doing, going back and forth. And I think they must be here to learn a huge piece that they kind of literally removed this other piece so they can experience it.
Yeah. I agree. But then you also have resting souls, not resting souls, a resting lifetime. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. That's how my guides explained it. But so the majority of us are running around in Earth life trying to figure it out, right? And there's some that are just like, I don't need to figure anything out. I'm not interested, right? But then on the other side, there's those that, this is very general, but they live to 99. They smoke and they drink their whole life, but they're healthy. They have money that comes in. They've never had to worry about money. They've had, they've traveled. They've just lived this life of, you're like, how is that possible, right? Souls can choose to come in to have what's called a resting life, which is they just really loved the human experience, but they want to come in and have a human experience, which is kind of like a soul vacation. It's like us going to Hawaii, right? And so they'll come in for the specific reason of just enjoying the fruits of Earth life. They don't want to take on a really heavy one. And most likely they had a really heavy one prior too. But when we see those people that just don't seem to have hit any road bumps, it's usually for that reason. And they don't gain a lot of understanding or lessons, but they get kind of a rest, but on an adventure, but like a gentle one.
Wow.
Right? So it's kind of a neat perspective to see all of that, but those are usually smaller percentages. And then the rest of us are, running around and doing all kinds of crazy things.
Oh, that's very interesting.
That is, I've never heard of that. But...
Okay, I'm making a mental note to higher self. Next life.
Well, I was thinking the same thing, Kitty. That don't sound half bad.
We schedule that one.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I wonder, why did I want this physical? And I look at the energies I study, and I do wonder, but and then when I get into the gratitude and the things I have learned, I'm like, I get it a little bit more.
And to
but
speak
I love
to that,
the idea of being able to not necessarily have to have a near-death experience like you had, to be able to change those fuses.
Yeah.
To be able to say, you know what, I don't want this anymore, or, this doesn't serve me anymore, or anything like that. I like that idea. That you can do that, and it doesn't have to be, on the other side. You can do it on this side.
Yeah, you definitely can.
Choices and stuff. So I love that idea.
Yeah. And I want to say too, another note too, is that I remember, again, from my soul perspective on the other side, when I was looking at my lifetime here, how much I valued it. And it gave me an understanding, and I'm going to try and kind of bridge these two pieces, but without going down a super tangent role, when I sometimes have had people come through who have passed of suicide, they've taken their own life, they're on the other side. There are times where I see the person, they're very peaceful, and they're like, this is what I needed to do. And I'm so glad. I'm so glad. Please be at peace. And then there's other times where I've seen people and they're spinning. They're like, oh my gosh, what happened? I shouldn't have done that. Right. And we see that in different kinds of death as well, too. Right. Some people are ready to go and some aren't. But I use that as an example because I use it for people that are in a crisis moment thinking, I don't want to be on the planet anymore. I don't want to be here. We've all been there to varying degrees, right? We've all questioned like, oh my gosh, why am I here? I say this because I remember my perspective from my spirit self was how much I valued everything that I had experienced up to that point. Everything, the highs, the lows, the everything. It was like a gift. It was like one of my greatest pride and joys. It was like, I felt almost like a kid in their science fair when they've put up their whole thing of everything that they learned. And they're like, this is everything. Like, look at what I know. It was like that. And so I remember just like having such a deep love for my journey here, which is why I remember when they said, do you want to go back? I reviewed that and I was like, yes, I want to keep going in that. And it's interesting because even after being back, there are times where I'm like, why did I decide to come back? Right? I'm like, I was over there. Why did I come back? And then I remember that perspective. And I remember like, no, I have learned so much and I'm doing so much. And we all are doing so much in this lifetime right now to keep going. Like keep growing it because you're going to be so proud of everything when you cross over the highs and the lows. You're going to see the lows, maybe the way you treated people or the really challenging circumstances that you're not proud of. You're going to see those and think, wow, did I ever learn perspective? Just as when you look at things that you did that were really beautiful and amazing, you're going to say, yeah, I'm so glad I had that opportunity.
Oh, that's wonderfully reassuring. You know, it just, it's such a great feeling. I do have a question. So you were a medium before, you're a medium still. Did anything really change for you in your skill? I mean, there has to be a different understanding or.
Yeah. It's so fast now. So my readings before, I used to do like hour sessions. It would be regularly an hour. Whereas now the stuff comes through so fast that I've changed them to half-hour sessions. Just because it goes, it comes and then it's done, right? Whatever needs to be said. So that's one. Another one is I really felt my ability to just, instead of kind of bouncing between 4, 5, 6D consciousness of perception and, you know, sometimes 3D bouncing around, I'm able to kind of hover in a higher state of awareness now with more ease. Like I said, it takes less to get me really bothered about human life. But there was an adjustment period, I gotta say, after coming back, there was an adjustment of having that perspective and then being back in 3D world and being like, oh man, this
being
so
back
far.
Being back in 3D world with it crumbling and spinning.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean,
challenge.
I think COVID for a lot of people, if they've had it, will do some of the same things your NDE did for you. Because having had it, and Amy will say, we've talked about this, it changes you.
I
It
can
just
imagine.
We were just talking about that today, Kitty. It changed, and the Kitty and I was, and we were just talking about how it's, if you haven't had it, you're not gonna know, but it's just the strangest disease or whatever you want to call it, but it changes you physically, and emotionally and mentally and spiritually. It really does. It changes everything about you. It's hard to explain to someone like that hasn't had it, but it really does.
And we're not recommending that you do that to get it.
No. Do something else, meditate or something, whatever you need to do.
Take that fuse right out, okay?
Yeah.
Take that fuse out, seriously.
You know, because
Yeah.
honestly,
it does change you.
Part of it is you get to this state, your whole brain, that there is something that it does that It is the most observant about life I've ever been, and yet at the same time, the least.
Wow.
Yeah.
Absolutely,
Wow.
Kitty. That's a beautiful way to say it. It was
Yeah.
like you're just in this other place, but yet exactly it's you can't even explain it unless you've had it. And we don't suggest you
Yeah,
try.
no, we're saying pull that,
Don't do
No.
it.
Pull
Don't
that
do it.
fuse right now and put in health.
Yeah.
we bring people like Ginette so that you don't have to go do
There
that.
you go.
So,
Yeah, there you go.
that, and I think that was pretty much your message.
Yeah.
You
really.
can bring this awareness without chronic suffering, without, if you can become aware.
Mhm.
And there are a lot of fears. I mean, I think that's an interesting part of this human existence
Mhm.
is what do you do with fears?
Oh, and that is like right on the heels of choice, right? That fear idea, fear is our greatest limiter. And not that we need to then oppose fear and be reckless, saying like, I'm not going to be afraid of anything. It's not about that. Let fear talk to you. Let fear, shine a little light on something, but then thank it. And then look at the thing and choose what you want to do about it. Fear can highlight something for you, but it doesn't need to stop you. And that's the thing that, we're still moving through how fear has been a very controlling narrative on our planet. But the spirit world is trying so much to bring more people who are enlightened, awakened experiences, talking like we all are, to share these understandings so that people can start to feel like, wait a minute, I don't have to live in fear all the time.
Yeah.
Even if I catch COVID, even if I cross over to the point of crossing over, even if I cross over, I'm going to be okay. It is going to be okay at somehow, in some way. And that was one of the biggest things I really learned in that whole experience. And I remember it was a couple months before my surgery, but it was at my absolute worst. I was still wanting to see clients, but I could only do it by phone. I had to be laying in my bed because I could barely talk through a half hour or an hour session at that point because I didn't have enough oxygen, all that kind of stuff. Like it was not good. And I remember finishing a phone call and my heart was really tightening because I just had no oxygen. It was working too hard for me to speak. And I remember thinking, if this is how I go, I guess maybe I'll surrender and I'll be okay to it. Like, I'm going to trust. And it was a pivotal moment of me realizing, even if I die, it's going to be okay. Right. And so I think what COVID has done in many ways is pushed many people either from their own experience or observing people in those experiences to those limits of having to choose, what are you going to do now? Are you going to surrender? Or are you going to run away? Are you going to change? Are you going to, are you going to just turn a blind eye? Like, what are you going to do? Because what you do determines who you become and what do you want to become now? Right. And so I feel COVID came in a way to really help shake people up and shake things up, which obviously it has, but we can make strides from it in some form.
Well, I think, especially speaking to when we early talked about anxiety, I think we're seeing part of that awakening is people realizing that that anxiety was beyond them and there were things they were being told. And now what do you do with that? That fear, because that's what the anxiety brought was ultimately, I feel like that's the ultimate fear. I'm going to die. Well, if I'm accepting that, then some of those fears, step back. And I love what you have to say about choice, because with all choices comes consequences one way or the other. That's all it is. And how we accept them and what we do with those is, even if the choice comes from beyond who we are, it's still a choice. So it's been chaotic, but I find it to be leveling off. We were talking about that before we came on the air. And you're doing a pretty amazing project talking to Indigenous leaders around the world, right?
Yeah, we're reaching out to more and more, all kinds of leaders. So, and even, gosh, this is even going as far as connecting to the light beings that bring the original wisdom to a lot of these different leaders and stuff. Like, it's really getting to the root of divinity, maybe, or the spiritual journey, which really is love and compassion and co-creation, regardless of the path you do it, which is one of the things that so many different leaders say, is they're like, this is but one path, right? Like my path, say they're a minister of some sorts, they're like, this is one way, but you can also do it this way and this way and this way and this way. And I totally agree. And that's one of the things that I really love, is when all these different avenues or religions or whatnot can come together and meet in the middle. Because I remember my guides, I'd had someone ask me very poignantly in a reading, well, what happens if I'm Muslim? What happens if I'm Christian and I die? Like, who goes where? And Spirit showed me this beautiful imagery of slides, like slides on a playground. And there were several slides all around in a circle that all led to this center place. And they said, whichever one you go to, you will land in the middle, whichever one. And you have probably all done different ones in different lifetimes, which have led you to the same source, which is why I think source is a beautiful word. But whether your word is God, source, creator, Allah, universe, it is this central energy, right? And so I found that really beautiful. And so that's why I really like connecting with different elders or leaders or religion, people in religions. And it just, everything is going to lead to love, source, creation. So, and I find that really comforting. And that's something I really hope to inspire in people, is that whatever your path is, follow your path, follow your calling. If your calling is to discover Buddhism and go to Tibet and be a monk, then follow that calling. But if your calling is to have a whole bunch of children and live on a farm, but, teach them how to live off the land, and that makes you feel connected to Gaia, to earth, to source, do that, right? Like find your calling, because they're not all the same.
No, absolutely not.
Beautiful. I'm
That
going
is
to ask,
beautiful.
it's 1:45, so if people have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat. This is just, amazing. I love the word source too. And one day I said, my husband, who is on a different path than I am, I asked him about circuits, because I told you I talked about circuits, and that's exactly what he said. Well, circuits are about, you're built in different levels, and they all lead from source, and source leads back to the circuit. And he's telling me this, and I'm like, this is like a channeled message.
Yeah.
Yes, it definitely
And it usually comes in an infinity. Once in a while, you only want one level of source, because there is more control for what you want to get done for your circuit. I'm like, oh, okay.
Amazing.
Yeah. Like,
amazing.
That's the story of a circuit. I'm like, okay. So, all right. Cinnamon, put your, what was the name of your book again? I'll make sure I put it in the comments.
I have it here. It's Avalon to Aurora is what it's called.
Well, I think I can remember that, since I wrote that.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. Avalon to Aurora.
And it really goes through the whole near-death experience, but it even talks about me growing up and, recognizing all these experiences I had growing up that were hard to explain at the time. And so it explains the story and the why. And then it leaves you with insights that I got from the other side of how to live on Earth, right? How to make the most of our time here.
Oh, I think that.
Well, I can so relate to when you were talking about, you thought it was your imagination, because that's where I always was. And I didn't have anyone in my family either that would have said, and I just really did think it was just kind of an overactive imagination. I would see things, feel things. And again, in retrospect, I can go, oh, that was why I did that. Like, it was just, maybe in the past few months, I'm like, why do I always have to sleep with my blanket up over, over my head almost?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, I know now, because I hear things. So I was trying to cover up, what I was hearing. Yeah. So, I mean, I get that so much. I relate to that so much.
I love that.
I do have a question though. That wasn't a question. That was a comment. One of the things you said was being able to connect better with spirit was about controlling your own thoughts. That's not always easy to do.
Yeah.
So can you kind of maybe just speak to that a little bit, that, you know, how you do that. I mean, I'm sure it's a practice and I'm sure you get better at it, but sometimes your own thoughts come in. And then again, sometimes you think, are those my thoughts? But just even being able to control them to where then you can say, yes, these are my thoughts. And then yes, these are my guides. Or
So I find one of the best things is, first of all, to get myself out of the way as best as I can. Okay. Like really consciously do that first, so that you're not going in kind of like sliding in with their thoughts, your thoughts. Like you sit, you get your stuff out of the way. Now you're ready. Then you open to their insights. And I find if something comes before I can finish asking the question, often that's from spirit. And also, if I get an insight that has no origin in my life or thoughts, that's from spirit. So if I can't find the root of where that thought came from, because you know how thoughts can travel, like, you know, you're doing this, which leads to this, which leads to this. And, you know, your initial thought was figure skating, and then you end up at the grocery store in your mind, right? If you can't find the origin, that's from spirit too. So those are two kind of quick ones. But I find too, there are just days when we are more open and days when we are not. And so if you're trying, or if I'm trying to force communication on a day when I'm not ready for it, I'm not open, I'm not zen enough in that moment, there's no point. It's just not worth it, right? So I will just take a break that day and actually give myself rest, and then come back at it fresh another day. And then the last one would be, is I write stuff down a lot. So when I ask a question, I'll write down things and then answer, whether it's a number, whatever I see, hear, or feel. And sometimes it won't make sense at first, and the brain will always want to fill in the blanks. Our brains love to fill in the blanks. It's like an automatic thing. So you take the first pieces that come together, and if it doesn't make sense, then maybe you come back to it again a little bit later, and you see if things are filled in or not. So, you know, those are kind of some pinpoint things, but really it's just practice. Like time spent doing readings helps you hone your gift, or time spent intuiting or channeling or whatever it is you're doing, tuning into spirit. The more time you do it, it's like a muscle. The stronger, the better, the more refined it gets.
Yeah, very good. We have a couple of questions. One from Cynthia. Are NDEs part of a soul contract? Are miracles of curing from chronic illness also part of a soul contract? Wondering because some are not cured and pass on, and others are cured and remain here.
I would say the answer to that would be yes and no to all of them, only because it's a beautiful question and a very good question. The only thing is that there's so much variability within spirit and how things work in this magical tapestry of everything, right? So in many cases, yes, near-death experience are usually juncture points for people. And sometimes it would be in the best interest of that person to come back free from that illness. Other times they're not done learning their lesson yet in it from a soul level, right? So those are some simple, clear-cut ways to explain it. But it's really important to remember that with anything with spirit is so dependent on the soul's journey, where it's at that point in that moment in time, which is why the answers really are not black and white, but shades of gray. So the potential for that is all there, though, definitely.
Well, yeah, because there are people who have NDEs who cross over, and so we don't know
exactly
that they had the conversation. Another question is, it's from Jennifer. Is COVID a catalyst for the change in direction?
I really believe so, actually.
I do too. Yeah,
I really do. I do see COVID as a real thing. I've had people say COVID's not a real thing. From my perspective, I had these guides called the 3 Guides of the Light that came in right when COVID started. And when they first approached me, they're light consciousness. So they showed themselves as 3 beings, but they're like, we just showed this for your brain so you can wrap your head around it, but we are light. We're light consciousness. They said, first thing you need to know is COVID is a thing. They showed it like a living, breathing thing. So an actual virus, organism, whatever you want to call it. But they said with great impacts of change. And so to, like I was saying, push us to either, if it was in our life path to exit, we would be exiting. If it was in our life path to experience a deep journey of illness, of being pushed close to the edge, that would happen. Or if it was in our life path to choose, are we going to be reckless in this time? Are we going to be thoughtful in this time? It was opportunity for change through choices. And so I want to speak really quickly to those that lost their lives in COVID. That's not just like, well, they wanted to go, that's it. It's not a big deal. It is still a big deal no matter what, when people pass on our planet. It is, no matter how connected we are. But with where the energies were going energetically, we were approaching a point of significant change. And there were many souls that were not contracted to stay through this change point. They didn't either want to stay, or it wasn't in their benefit to stay through the changes we are moving through right now, this back and forth fear, blah, blah, blah. So they exited early. And Spirit had shown me that with COVID, every person would be given almost like a ticket, like, you know, those old school train tickets where they punch your ticket or whatever, right? Like everybody would be given a ticket to punch it in the way that they would choose from a higher self level because of COVID. It was putting everybody up to question, in a sense, because of this rapid change that we're going through because of it.
Yeah, and you know, I definitely, we were talking about just before we came on too, there is a call for us to be letting go. It's given us a chance to let go of beliefs and reevaluate at such a deep societal level, you know, and we've seen what we would call the best and the worst, but it really is about, I think you called it crumbling?
Yeah, the crumbling. It has to crumble to have space to be rebuilt. Right, so.
Yeah, and that is a piece of what is going on. You know, I'm thinking we do a book group, and I'm thinking I know a book title that we'll be doing. So if since we know the author, we could ask her questions.
Lovely. Absolutely.
You're spot on, Kitty. Good job.
Yeah, I think we know the next title for the next book group.
That's wonderful.
And then, you know, so we may be contacting you too. I'm sure we'll be contacting you again, but
I'd be so honored.
Because I'm sure what an amazing gift to be able to read a book and then actually ask the author, what did you mean? And stuff. So, so everybody mark it down. That's our new book.
That'll be our book club. Yes, we go
our
into
book for the end of November.
The wintry months where, you know, you're a little more homebound and
end
stuff.
Of November, beginning of December, we'll be doing Avalon to Aurora.
I love that. Thank you. That's so sweet.
Oh, this has been an amazing program. And I'm very excited to read the book too, because, well, first of all, honestly, when you did the whole thing about the plug, I was like, okay, because I've been led down that road. So I'm like, we've been talking to some of the same people along the way. So, you know, and that you have these energies and you can use them and you can pull them and you learn from them and then you can get rid of them. That's part of your work.
Choice is our greatest gift, I heard some brilliant person say. I love that though, but it's true.
It's so true.
So true. And so I had to write that down because that's
a good tattoo. Choice is our greatest gift. So,
well,
you know what? If
I'm not a tattoo person, but
there is a meditation at the end of the book. And if people want, it's on my YouTube page already right now. And it's called Meditation for Choice, just under Ginette Biro Medium in YouTube, Meditation for Choice. And they can find that in the different, if you look up different playlists within my page, so you go to my page, you look at the playlist, and
we have, you're going to be on our playlist called IOTS Speakers. So yes.
Oh, okay, there you go. Yeah, so people can find that meditation, which was a channeled meditation from that whole experience. So if they want to just tune into that already, they totally can. It's right there.
And I would recommend you follow, because she's doing these amazing things with the podcast and other people coming around. And so we're so honored that you've come, and
thank you.
It's just been exactly what I could feel it all day. This has been absolutely amazing.
That's so great. Thank you so much for having me on. And again, thank you guys for shining your light. The more of us that do, the more it inspires more to do. And then we just, lift up humanity, and life is just that much brighter.
And I so agree with you on the stories. That's what we're all about. I'm just like, every time I say that to Kitty, I'm so interested to get into their story, because there's just so much wisdom and knowledge you can glean from someone else's story. I just,
and you have thanks pouring in. This was awesome. Thank you. Great program. God bless you.
That's so nice.
If you haven't had a chance, if you just joined us, this will be available. We'll upload this and you'll be able to watch it. You can rewatch the whole thing on our page, but we're going to say goodbye. Ginette, would you stay on for just a minute?
Yes.
And we're going to say goodbye from Intuition of the Soul, folks, and watch for Vibe of the Week. Hey, this fit in with our Vibe of the Week. Our vibe this week was to be your own best friend.
My gosh, it
you
totally
are a
fit
gift
in
to
with
all
Vibe
of
of the
us.
Week.
So thank you. All right.
Okay.
Take
Thank
care.
you. Bye.
Bye.
I'll stop the recording.